各位觀眾大家好，我哋今日請到咗 SFMTA 嘅 CFO Bree Mawhorter 嚟同我哋講講關於 SFMTA 嘅呢個財務危機。Hello, Ms. Mawhorter, I'm so happy having you here today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Mr. Mawhorter, so recently I watched the news. It's about the SFMTA may suspend 3-line cable cars in San Francisco downtown. You know, this is kind of a controversial topic and people are kind of concerned. So I wanted to know is anything you wanted to address. And on the other hand, I wanted to know what's the current situation for the budget deficits?
Well, I do want to clarify that suspending cable car service is just one of many options that we have in front of us to close a really large budget deficit. Our budget deficit is $322 million starting in July of 2026. That is almost a third of our budget. And so that is a really significant deficit to close. And suspending cable car service is just something that's under consideration if we're not able to find new revenue. And it's one of many service reductions that we would be considering if we're not able to find that new revenue.
Oh, so it's just an option, like maybe for people to vote or consider it. It's not like a fact.
Yes, that's correct. So right now, the Muni Funding Working Group is a group of stakeholders, including the Controller's Office, the MTA, unions, citizens, groups, and community groups who are coming together to talk about options to close the deficit. Those options include making the agency more efficient, service cuts, one of which that's under consideration is cable car, revenue enhancements, and then service enhancements that might make the public more positive towards Muni and make it more likely for them to vote for a regional revenue measure in November of 2026.
I see. So let's rewind a little bit about the election. I wanted to know how the Proposition L and M impacts the SFMTA current financial situation.
So that is a little confusing. You are right. There were two propositions. Proposition L was a tax on top of ride shares like Uber, Lyft, and Waymo. And Proposition M was a change to the city's gross receipts tax. If Proposition L had passed, all of the money from this additional tax on Uber, Lyft, and Waymo would have come to the MTA. But because of the way the legislation was written, if Proposition M, the changes to the gross receipts tax, got more votes than Prop L, then Prop L would not pass. So even though both propositions got more than 50%, only Proposition M passed. There will be no additional tax on Uber, Lyft, and Waymo, and there will be no additional funds for the MTA budget, which means we are still looking at that really challenging $322 million deficit starting in July of 26.
Oh, I see. So is SFMTA have another way to get the funding, maybe like by the state or by the federal?
Thank you for asking that question. I think, on the federal and state level, at the federal level, particularly with the results of the national election, it's very unlikely that we would get additional support from the federal government. And the state government provided resources to all the transit agencies in the region for 2 years. Those funds are going to be fully expired by June 2025, which is why we're looking at a deficit in July of 2026. So I think the federal and state are very unlikely to provide additional resources. However, we are looking at a regional revenue measure, which would mean that citizens in the Bay Area counties would vote to levy an additional tax, possibly a sales tax, possibly a parcel tax, in order to provide more revenue for all of the area's transit agencies, primarily BART, Caltrain, and MTA.
I see. So I believe that is not a happy story for all of us. Like the iconic cable cars may be suspended, and then the public transportation maybe will be cut off. So what do you think like the priority reason to cause this issue? Do you think it's a long-term problem or because of the pandemic?
Like most transit agencies in the country, the pandemic really changed the way people move. People no longer go to work in an office 5 days a week, which means they're not driving downtown to park, and that's a big source of revenue for the MTA, and they're not taking public transit to get to work. In addition, because they're not in the office, they're not going out to lunch, they're not getting their hair cut, they're not staying for drinks. And that means that things like the city's sales tax are lower, which means that there's less general fund dollars, some of which come to support the MTA. So when you combine the loss of revenue from parking and transportation because of work from home, the weakness in the city's general fund, and the fact that state and federal relief are going to be fully expended by June 2025, that's what's really driving the deficit in July of 2026. It's really about a lack of revenue because the MTA has done a really good job of changing its service plans and being efficient and controlling its expenditure since COVID. It's really about the revenue that went away post-COVID.
I see. So besides the cable car, is there any other service probably will be affected?
We are looking at a lot of options. I will say $322 million is a level of deficit that means almost every single service the MTA provides will be impacted. We're looking at everything from reducing the frequency of buses and trains by 50%. We're looking at reducing nighttime service. As you already noted, we're looking at suspending the cable car, but we're also going to have to think about slowing down or reducing services that provide safety in the streets, like traffic calming, and making sure that traffic signals are in good working order.
Oh, I see. So is any other thing that SFMTA is working on, maybe like partnership with another agency to deal with this budget issue?
So we have two approaches to solve the budget deficit. The first is the MTA convened with the controller, the Muni Funding Working Group, where we're bringing together stakeholders and elected officials in the city, union members, community groups, to evaluate a series of solutions, which is the best group of solutions that can close the deficit. So that's one thing. And once we get guidance from this group, we're going to be seeking further guidance from the community. Secondly, we're working with the other regional transit agencies, BART, AC Transit, Caltrain, as well as the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, which is the regional planning agency for the Bay Area for transportation, and Senator Wiener's office to identify new revenue sources for all of the transportation systems in the Bay Area.
Oh, I see. So I believe SFMTA is working on so many projects or working on another option to deal with this budget issue. So is there any other message or idea you want to share with the public to make them less concerned about this thing?
Well, I will say that service cuts are our absolute last choice, and we will only be implementing service cuts if we are unable to identify new revenue sources. So what we would ask for from the public is when we have ideas about how to raise revenue, we would ask for the public's support of those revenue measures so that we don't have to cut service.
I see. So thank you so much for sharing all this information, and I hope that we will find a good solution to solve this issue. Thank you for coming.
Me too, and thank you for having me.